because I've been exploring this area for a couple of years, and I'll share some of the findings. That said, there are plenty of examples which I did not collect in this presentation that are out there in the world as well. So, I don't need to explain myself. Therese did a great presentation. So what we'll cover today is, all right, first, why would you care about this at all? Quite important if you're going to use it. Give you an idea of different use cases and learnings from applying it. And then summarize with a few useful patterns that I've found actually makes a lot of sense regardless of what type of context you come to. So that said, a small interaction hint, open Menti somewhere in a browser next to you, because there will be a point in the presentation where I'll ask you to play the role of an Agile coach. You'll get to walk into the room and see what I saw, and invite you to figure out what should be happening. For that, you need to be ready. So, small hint. Okay. So, why do we care? Well, if you would walk back 1.5 years ago and ask, in what business plan did it say prepare for a virus outbreak? It wouldn't be too many. You probably get laughed at if you walked into a boardroom and say that. Probably not anymore, right? So this pandemic has actually put the word agile on top of top-level in boards and etc., because suddenly you realize that there are uncertainties which we did not see coming. And the only way to deal with this uncertainty is to actually have agility built into the organization. So where is Agile useful? Well, of course, if you want to overcome uncertainty and be ready for it, makes a lot of sense. If the world is, complex, a lot of dependencies, which normally is the case if you are growing really fast, then Agile also makes a lot of sense. And some good case studies that show that, Agile helps to grow. However, this said, it's not the silver bullet in all different scenarios. If you have highly repetitive tasks, you don't use Agile, use a machine or find another way. So those scenarios on the left, that's the scenarios you probably see in the cases that are coming up. And now I will speculate a little bit. So bear with me or take this with a grain of salt. But there are some evidence that shows that this is actually the case. So if we take a strategic perspective on a company's development and the conditions for this company to thrive, like in the age of globalization, you can see it in that there are a couple of steps here. So first, you might employ Agile for the benefit of leverage human potential, getting away bureaucracy, getting engagement. And that is an excellent way to attract and grow skilled people. They come to you. This is already the case. I mean, this is one of the reasons why companies use Agile today. Now, but there's a second step that you can employ, which is use Agile not just for your internal operations, but to actually do rapid market experimentation. So you are throwing things out to the market and you're figuring out what sticks and what customers love. And by figuring this out, you can actually develop products that are better suited to the environment where you're operating. This is interesting because currently I would make the speculation here that IT is everywhere. So regardless if you're developing your own software or services, you are depending on it. So you need to find ways to deal with it in a good way. And then there's a third leap. I'll just call it the AI revolution and say that, yes, right, imagine that you did the two first steps. Now you'll have more brains than you have staff. Now, what I want to emphasize with this is that each steps build the precondition for the next. And I think some evidence and data I've seen by studying, for example, the studies that our digitalization agency DIG has done in Europe, is that when they look at the preparations for the third step, they can very accurately predict that if that only happens if you have enough data market data generated, which is the second step. So what I think it's easy to underestimate is how long it takes to get each step in place. And if it takes too long, regardless if you're doing the right move, you'll be late. So each step depends on each other. That's my speculation. And the Agile is a way to get up through the staircase in a very quick way. That said, I will make a speculation here that the second step, using the rapid market experimentation, is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity that companies do not exploit today. Some do, but I'll give some clues in how you can do this. And I hope to inspire you to do more at this in this area. Let's stop the speculation for now and look at the real cases. So before I jump into them, not everything I've done, over the time and that you see is worked from the get-go. Now, I've done mistakes. I've visualized things when no one cared. I've been driving change during high periods of stress, and you'll get a very odd response if you do that. I've been scaling Agile too fast. So yes, there are mistakes in these stories, and I'll share a few of them with you, but just to be open, not everything is a straightforward journey when you do these types of changes. So the cases I want to share with you and talk with you about is these ones: marketing, construction, compliance legal, business operation, business development, and finally racing. And if we look into this from a high level overview, what happens when you use Agile inside marketing? And my reference here is some experiments that we were doing inside Zalando, and Zalando's brand marketing unit. What we could see is if you want to get Agile working, this was required a mental shift from the people that work there. That wasn't that easy. So it wasn't a straightforward journey to do this type of shift. And there was a shift for being creative and still being creative, but being data-driven creative. So this is a change from you coming up with a concept and believing that you're creative, you come up with a concept and you throw it out in the market and you believe that that will produce an impact, and you don't know, to understanding iteratively as you produce a concept, learn using data if this concept is producing an impact in the audience you intended. And this is a huge mental leap that at least we learned for people to do. And it took some time for them to actually embrace this. Now, what we found when we used Agile here is that Agile was very useful in shortening lead time. So the time to develop a global campaign. Just to give you a frame of reference, I know companies that develop global campaigns, it takes them a year. So they basically do a plan that says, you want to run a global campaign, you need to start a year from now. And you need to tell me exactly what's going to come into the final concept. Well, here at Zalando, we were able to do global campaigns on a period of roughly 6 to 8 weeks. Just to give you like a reference here. But more importantly, what we find earlier is that this also produced less stress during the campaign work. A normal case scenario that would happen is that you would launch one of these campaigns. It would be pretty easy going in the beginning. But then when you come into the end, the final weeks, the crunch time, you'll see stress going out through the roof. And you'll see people doing overtime like crazy. And that's in an environment where the culture and the atmosphere is you make it happen. So this, over time, if you repeat this pattern, burns people out, makes them lose faith and trust that the situation won't ever change. And what will you do when you realize that? Yes, you change jobs. So this was very crucial for to solve this problem. And in the end, we had campaigns that when we came to the end of the campaigns, we knew that everything was sorted and we have very little overtime. And that was just during 1 year of Agile. So higher engagement was the final piece and component here, and especially retain skilled people. So if you grow their skill in this area, you want to keep them. You don't want them to be hired by other agency. You want to keep them in the organization. Now I'm going to share one of a few stories from construction. And the reference here I have is, and you can read about this case on agilakontrakt.se, is Karlstad sjukhus. So what Karlstad sjukhus proved was they procured their hospital using an agile contract, and they built the hospital using cross-functional teams that had a high degree of self-organization to them. This said, they were able to build the hospital on time, on budget, without drama, and they had a ton of surprises during the journey. And this is a reference towards other hospitals that you might see that, after they get built, they figure out you can't use the hospital to the intended purpose. And this was perfectly fit for the purpose from day one. Now, this wasn't accidental, and this wasn't the result of a perfect plan. This was the result of incrementally and iteratively building the hospital. To give you an idea, they didn't build all the houses at once. They built one house in a time to make sure that the learnings from the first house could be removed, could be switched to the second. They also prototyped key rooms, like surgery rooms. So they built one-to-one prototypes of surgery rooms. They put in the equipment, they sent in doctors and asked, so tell me, can you do surgery here? And they found out, no. And they also found out some unexpected things like, yeah, we can't even build the room the way it has been drawn on the drawings. So what type of mental shift is required for this to happen? Well, first you need to have very early the shift from, no, we don't build a house in a big bang way. We expect things to pop up, so we build it incrementally. And that needs to be there in your project plan from the get-go. The second mental shift is that you shift how you steer the project from budget steering to fit for purpose steering. And if you read out the case story, you'll see how they used another way to actually check the progress of how the hospital was being useful during the journey of its construction. All right, let's jump to this area. This is pretty interesting because I sometimes hear, Agile compliance, not a fit, or Agile and legal can't work. So I'm the kind of guy that when someone says that, I want to go and try it. So this is actually learnings from going and using Agile inside compliance in the banking area. So what are the learnings and the benefits that we saw here? Well, first, it allowed leaders to work strategically. So it allowed them to work more long-term and deal with issues not internal to compliance, but maybe internal to the legislation changes that might happen years from now. It allowed them to have a shared overview of work. So transparency, both from the teams and from people who work there, on what are they working on and what are they focusing on and what are the priorities really. And a very interesting common scenario for people in this area is that they have like a dual situation. They do need to do some internal work inside their team, but they also do a lot of external work helping others as advisor, not advisor, maybe they might not call them advisors, but as some type of a speaking partner. And what we found that Agile allowed the different team members to balance this in a nice way, and it was easy to deal with large projects, even though members were switching between external and internal work. Now, there were two mental shifts that I observed had to happen for this to fly. So first is you need to do the shift from leading individuals to leading self-managing teams. Actually, this is proved not to be, in my situations, a very hard shift to do. This was embraced very quickly. Yes, it's good for everyone if we can make this change. But then there's a second shift that can be a little bit harder. And this is doing the shift from seeing compliance and legal as a function that does controlling and sign off to a function that provides guidelines and training. That's a little bit harder, and sometimes you need a few pioneers that are, are willing to stick their nose out and say, "Let's give this a try before we can, before we judge that this won't fly." But it does fly, and there are some good examples out there where compliance and security functions has made this shift, and it's been totally necessarily for the company's pace to develop. That said, these are the cases I'm going to focus on today and talk a little bit about. So let's dive into them. So first case I'm going to share with you is from business development. So how do you actually create a new product? Well, you might start with an idea. You write a business plan to get your budget. You work like hell. You launch, and finally you get, oh no, darn, maybe no one cared as much as we did when we developed this. And the problem here is it might take years to figure this out. And a lot of time, a lot of effort from people who spend a lot of energy is basically waste and put into the waste basket. So can you do this differently? Yes, you can. But just to give you a few cases here and where this has happened. And every company has it. And I've been part of building products like this too. So this exists everywhere. But two cases here, or one case here, Legal Universe. You probably might not have heard about it. But it's a big thing that Lego spent 4 years to build using Agile teams. 250 people involved, and it was shut down after 2 years of operation. So that's why no one's heard about it. And meanwhile, if you just compare this with Minecraft, there was just a couple of people in the basement in Stockholm that did very quick prototyping, put their stuff out, and people liked it, right? So let's give you another example of how this could have evolved. And the learnings from Lego Universe was that, yes, too complex for kids to play. That was the sort of what killed Lego Universe. But here's Savioke. Savioke is a robot developed, and the intent is to have it as a robot that serves inside hotels, as a home service robot, basically. It could provide snacks, food, things out of request of the people, the guests in the hotel. And all fine of this, you develop the robot, you have a very robust business plan, everything is fine. And suddenly, someone in, CTO raises his hand and said, this is a very cool robot, but will people interact with it? And, at this point, you could have said, well, of course, and and continued and said, let's build an even better robot. But what they did was different at this point, because they realized, shit, if the people won't interact, then this is just a big hunk of metal. So what they did instead, and a different way to deal with product development, is you find a problem that customers care about. And then you test. You might have an idea, but you do not move forward with any plans until you have the proof that people will give you some currency in sorts to get it solved. And until this point, you do iterative things, and you basically fake it till you make it. But when you have this proof, that's when you have product market fit, and you have something that people want and they're willing to pay for. And this is the point when you start to scale. Now, the interesting thing is you can actually do one iteration through all this step in roughly a week's time. It's not mandatory that it needs to take a week. Could take 2 weeks, still way better than a year. But if you use something called a design sprint, if you would hear this concept, this is exactly the intent, to go from left to the right in 1 week. And this is the point that not until you find this setting, that's when you start to think about the scaling problem. So who uses this? Well, this is currently used inside Lego. This is currently used inside Google. And this is just one way to approach this. This is not the only way to deal with this situation, but it is something I find that companies could explore a lot more. So what did Savioke learn? Will people interact? Yes, but only if the robot was displaying emotions. So it's only if the robot was singing a song, doing a small dance, having a facial expression, that's when people start to engage with it. If it did do that, it was just, I ignore it. I'll call someone else, right? So that was a huge thing for them to find out before they started to ship their product. So summing this up, this is a shift from being business plan driven to validating product market fit very early. And I find this as an opportunity which is there for the grasping that few companies do exploit to the fullest. And what benefit does this produce? Well, faster return on investment, faster money, and lower cost of operations because you don't need to maintain the solution which has marginal traction. And you can do this or even if resources are scarce. So, and that's why it's very an attractive approach for startup companies. So this said, let's jump into business operations. So this said, this is the time I want you to be a little bit ready with your Menti web pages, because I'll ask you to think for yourself at one point when you go through this case. So what's the background here? Well, the background here is that we're talking about a business operation team that is dealing with the back end part of business operations inside a financial institution. So they will be the people who would deal with you saying, I have a life event, my pension funds needs to be transferred in this and that way. And they will be the ones that would sort that out. So what was the challenge here? Well, the challenge here is that this organization is growing really rapidly. And what started out with being 2 or 3 people knowing everything, suddenly turns out that, they can't be everywhere and they need colleagues that, grow to the same level as they are. So they are a team of roughly 16, 17 people. And when we started with doing a very quick retrospective. So, what it's like to work here. And you could see a few comments. It's really fun to be here. I like the variation of work tasks, but it's very stressful and it's hard to keep up. And I see a lot of small task requests coming from the side. So we start off with this approach, and then suddenly someone comes in and pulls me in another direction. And finally, I wish we had better systems. And everyone would love that, but I've almost given up hope that would ever happen. And the interesting part here is that they have internal development units inside this organization that are responsible for developing support for this team. However, this type of request from this team, they are quite small and they rarely get to the top of the backlog. And they've almost given up hope that, the tooling will ever improve. So what is the experiment that we did? You can look at a couple of things that are already there, which is important to observe. The first is they do have a good team. People enjoy working there. They love the variation of work tasks. So you don't really need to build a well-working team here. That's already in place. What you need to manage is how the team interacts with their outside world, and so they can have some confidence in this interaction. So the experiment we tried was using Kanban. And I'll give you a brief overview of how the Kanban system was set up. And what you see here is not the first iteration of it. What you see here is maybe 2 months into giving this a try. So first on top, you'll have priorities. So on the left, you have high priority, and on the right, on the bottom, you have low priority. And with this comes a mandate also. So if someone comes with a small request that has a low priority, each member of this team have the mandate to say, sorry, but not right now, because this is really a low priority thing. And by that, they do not hold the expectation anymore that they have to solve this issue, right? Down here, you'll have the backlog. So this is the stuff that people would ask them to do. So this is both internal and external stuff. Down here is a WIP limit, and this is symbolized by small symbols here. So WIP limits are work in progress limits. So it's kind of a limit of how many things do we allow to be live in work at any single point of time. And up on the right, you'll have improvements. This is the stuff that teams want to have that solves their everyday life. All right. Finally, on the right, data, right? So here you have some history and data on how the team's been doing collective, both some quality aspect and some efficiency aspect and engagement aspect. Down on the left, routines. So on the left, you'll see routines grouped by day of month. So this team had things they had to do at certain days, run a batch, do this. And what they would do is that they will pull the yellow sticker, which is related to the day or month, and they will insert it in the Kanban system. And once done, it will pull them back to the left. Okay, now it's your turn. Imagine you're a coach, or you're a person who walks into their room and you want to figure out how are they doing. And you step into the room and you see this. And I want to give you the opportunity to figure this out. But this is a real situation I was confronted with when I was coaching this team. And so I wanted to give this a try. So I will give you, see if I can make this work. Go to menti.com, punch in the code you see here, and be ready to make your call, basically. And I'll give you a vast amount of time, 30 seconds to make up your mind, so you don't overthink. So give this a try. All right. Let's see if technology works, and let's hear your thoughts on this. So how's the team doing? 20% doing fine. 40% roughly seems having a hard time keeping up. 10%, yes, drinking coffee. They're not there. So interesting thought. And 30%, what a silly question. Now, how on earth can you tell this? All right. So this said, I'll show you how I decide for this situation, and just to see what I observed. Not saying this might be the right way to observe this. So having a look at this board, you look in the board and you look, all right, first you look at what is the improvement velocity? So how many improvements in flights do we have? That's the first question. And it's pretty hard to see, but I can look at this board and say, yeah, we have 2 improvements in flights, and it doesn't show, but there's actually 2 to 4 improvements that's being completed. This is good news because this is given evidence that things are getting better. So regardless of what the current state is, we are getting better. So the second thing to observe is a lot of the prioritized work, as the stuff that's on the left side of the board, has actually been completed. This is good. This means it seems like the group is focusing on the right things, and they are actually able to complete things that have high priority. It's very good news. Down here, if you look at the backlog, you'll see not so many items waiting. And if there are items waiting, you'll see that they are grouped to the right side of the board, the stuff that have lower priority. Also a good thing, right? And finally, down here, the team is decided to shift magnets and use small elks. So obviously they have humor. It's a sign of good spirit. And of course, you'll see more things if you walked into the room yourself. But it is a good sign. People are enjoying things here. So my summary by seeing this is they are in a good shape. So, if you compare to retrospective, what we had when we started, so I can't keep up with work, a lot of stress. We currently have moved into a state where that's not the major problem anymore, which is very interesting and important observation. But the second as important observation is, if I can figure this out by walking into a room with one glance of my eyes, the team members can as well. And other people's can as well. But most importantly, people that work there can walk into the room and say, either we need help here, or we're stuck, or things are going quite well. So I have some time, which takes away stress, right? So how did Kanban actually help out in this case? Well, first, it actually helped out by aligning priorities from outside stakeholders. So they will be able to create a balanced and trusted backlog that outside stakeholders started to respect. So this thing that people think come from the side became less of a problem. And if it actually happened, they knew that they could turn them down if it was a lower priority request. The second thing that happened, already touched upon, is that the team had all the time an overview of what they were working on. So the situation that one person would be working on something, and suddenly they get pulled in another direction, they get sick, and things would fall between chairs. That was mostly removed. We rarely saw that situation. And the third thing is that the team started to take a really high pride and responsibility in how the process worked through different visual policies and by changing and updating the board. So team became engaged in how the process worked and improved this weekly. And finally, it helped us slice down bigger complex tasks, and especially this kind of things where you wouldn't be able to understand what someone actually was asking for, because well, in the Kanban system, we would offer an acceptance criteria. About that, it would be very clear. We could turn back things that wasn't thought through, and it wasn't our problem to figure it out. The other thing that happened, and I find this interesting, was how they were working with their improvements. So it's pretty common that people would use retrospective, and that's the first starting point. But you need to move that in retrospective and turn it into action. And this is where the Kanban system helped us, because retrospective, put it on a Kanban board and then make it happen. Right? But the interesting patterns that I saw besides this are these two. The first pattern that I saw was the managers were, having small, they could call it coffee-driven improvements. So in the case of development department not paying attention to the tooling, remember I mentioned that? The way that they will approach this will be, they will start by approaching this development department and just say, let's meet and have a coffee. We'll not talk about work, we'll just meet and have a coffee and now and get to know each other. And during a period of maybe 1 month, they would just do this. And the second month, they would start to talk about where do we want to go? What type of problems we would like to solve? And in this case, they would have a much open, transparent conversation. And these managers were able to impact their outside world so successfully that the development department decided to put one developer in this team and actually code as a person in this team was working, solving a bunch load of small problems that been nagging them for years, right? And the second pattern, which I rarely observed anywhere else, is the managers would do this on a routine. So every quarter, roughly, they would schedule what they call a routine walk. And what they would do is that they would actually walk the routine they would asking the team to do. And they would look at the routine and ask, in the state we are at, should we do it this way? Or should we stop doing this routine? Take it away. It's no longer needed. And this was important not to just pile more process work on the team, but actually take things away that now was redundant. So how was this useful? Well, it helped the team grow new team members and onboard new team members very, very quickly. Less requests fell between chairs, and it reduced stress. And what I found interesting, that I interviewed them a year, 1.5 years later, and they said, we now found that we use the Kanban system during periods of high demand. So there's season variation in demand, and during the low variation, the low demand periods, they would just do the normal work. But during the high periods where there's high demand, that's when they would go back and would use the Kanban system. So final story I'm going to just give you a heads up on is a story from racing. And I won't walk through the whole story. I'll leave this as a teaser for the future. But what I'm going to talk about or mention here is how a young Swedish driver who does not have a heritage or very famous parents is making his journey throughout the go-kart all the way up to international front row racing. That guy is called Linus Lundqvist, and I have been through periods mentoring his, for example, his race engineer when he made his early steps into racing. And the interesting thing is that they are using agile techniques inside this race team, and especially what I found interesting is that what they've learned to do is how to exploit opportunities which no one else is seeing. And I will give you a real example here. The second season that Linus was racing in the Formula Series, which is kind of the first important step, he was racing nationally, and he was going really well. So it was at the end of the season, he was on top of the list. And I was walking inside the paddock and I was talking to a competitor team. And I was asking the competitor team, so what do you think of the series? What do you think of Linus? And what the race engineer of the competitor team was saying that, yeah, it seems like Linus is winning, and it is because Linus is a heck of a driver. I found that very interesting because it's what he didn't say. He didn't see all the things that this team was doing, which was right in front of his eyes, but he chose not to see it. And I won't walk through all these things, but the interesting aspect, what Linus' team has learned to do is at each series, at each level, they've learned to find and exploit opportunities which no one else is using. And Linus is now this season racing in Indy Light, which you could see is a US version of Formula Racing, and it's the series underneath Formula One, equivalent in the US. So, where will Linus end up? I don't know. But the interesting aspect is that each level, they found a way. And what's interesting to look at is how they found out this way. And it's not random, because this pattern's been repeating itself many, many times. I'll leave that as a teaser, and go and look up Linus. I'll give you advice, follow him, check out how he's doing, and I wish him also best for the future. So summing this up, there are a few patterns that we found are useful across all these different types of situations. First pattern, organize and run teams of 5 to 8. Pretty straightforward. Does not require that you have IT. You work in the IT sector. Work with a trusted backlog, which is trusted by the surrounding. Have visual overview of work because it reduces stress. Limit WIP. Don't do too many things at the same time because you retain focus. By all means, use retrospectives. And if there's only one thing you should be doing to get started is implement retrospectives, because this is a stop and reflect moment. Across all these different cases, slicing and doing incremental delivery has proved valuable. And understanding how to set the law, get quality input and set some condition on what type of input should be prepared for you to even consider starting the work has proved really, really valuable. So that's my summary of these different patterns. Feel free to try them out. And they, for me, have proven valuable regardless of what context I've been in. So the interesting part here is that these are mostly process fixes. And there's another level, which is thinking about the mindset. And one of the things I want to for us to think about is that when we move from two different areas, like IT to marketing, each, we could say that they have this different set of practices and they have a few principles which they honor. The interesting things with Agile values and mindset is they are not very, they are quite attractive regardless of context. So if you want a lever into other areas, start talking about values and mindset because they are universal. They are not context dependent. The challenge then becomes that the practices from IT, they are actionable, and same as practices in marketing. And the mindset leap as a change agent and as a leader is not to copy the practices because people will not see them or they might refuse them, but rather take this leap and say, take a practice, transfer it through the values and mindset and change it to a practice which is inside that specific field. That is a very good change pattern. And I've done it a couple of times. And I've done the mistake of copying a practice, and that rarely has been flying. So that's my change agent advice for you to carry with you as a mindset. And also the understanding that Agile values and mindset is applicable regardless of what type of business function you are talking with. That said, I guess that you all have great stories of acts of leadership that you have seen and witnessed. And what I would ask you to do is share it, right? Give an idea what type of acts of leadership that you have seen. And share it on this site, activeagileleadership.com, because this helps build an understanding what type of acts that actually proved useful. Final words. First step of getting somewhere is imagine that is possible. So in all these cases, I've been doubtful myself. Will Agile be useful? Will it not? But you need to start to think about, okay, maybe it could work. Because if you don't think of that it could work, it will probably never materialize. And once you think that this could work, translate it into what would be useful in this specific context. What would be helpful here? And work with that. That's my summary. And let's leave the field open for questions if we still have time.